Thanks for coming back. Just as an announcement first, you need your phone for this lecture. That's not something you usually say when you're announcing a speaker at a conference, but don't put away your phones. Get your phones handy for some part during the talk. Now, this talk is online, so I either have to have my back towards you or have my back towards the speaker. So I will choose it like this. Sorry, Anne, to stand with my back to you. So this talk is special in several ways. Well, obviously, first of all, it's online instead of Anne actually being here. That's because she is in Paris enjoying the Olympic Games. So she's actually talking to us during her holiday, I think, which we're very grateful that she's doing. And so a bit in line with her theme, she just sent me an email thanking me for the opportunity to do this online, but I think we should thank her for doing this during a holiday in Paris. The other special thing is that this is the keynote lecture of the workshop, so it's a bit longer, and we invited her especially. I'll tell you why in a minute. And it's also special in the sense that the topic is not about science and doing the science that we do, but it's about who does the science, the scientists. We'll hear from her about that in a minute. And the reason for inviting her to give this plenary lecture is that last year she received the Adams Prize, which I understand is one of the oldest and most prestigious prizes of Cambridge University, awarded since 1848, and also given, for example, to Roger Penrose and well, who else got the prize? Stephen Hawking got the prize. And a bit, so it's named after John Adams, who, as a sort of fun fact you might want to know, is the one who discovered the planet Neptune as a mathematician. It's been awarded since 1848, and a bit in line with the topic of the talk, it took them 150 years to award it to a woman in 2002. And there since have been 5 or 6 women who received the prize, now including Anne. And I found an announcement of the prize from 1940, and it said that the prize is open to the competition of all persons, including women. I thought they needed to. Times are changing, because now it says, the website says the prize is open to the competition of all persons. They dropped the women part. Still, we're very happy, and maybe I should say I'm privileged to be here to announce Anne's talk. There will be an interactive part, like I said, with the phone, and we'll see. It worked at Epidemics quite brilliantly with 800 people, so I'm sure we can make it work with 80 here in this room. So without further ado, Anne, I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Hans, for such a kind introduction and for introducing the topic so brilliantly. I may have to skip my first few slides. I'm going to try and share my screen. And hopefully you can see this. Can you confirm if you can see that?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. So yes, thank you so much to Hans and the organizers for the invitation. And sorry that I couldn't be here in person, but I'm very happy to be sharing with you today some of the thinking I've been doing over the last year or so on the impact of privilege on careers in epidemic modeling, which I've titled Sir or Madam. And as Hans has already introduced, actually this talk really stems from this prize I received last year. And he's kind of like already given you a bit of a hint of maybe why, but I'll give you the statistics on this. So I went to look at who had been the Adams Prize winners in the past. And this shows you the number of awardees per decade from the kind of 1850s all the way to the 2020s. The colors are gender. I'll let you guess which is which. And as Hans said, it wasn't until 2002 that the first woman won the prize. Her name is Dr. Susan Hawson. So this meant we spent 152 years with only men winning, and it took 69 men to win before a single woman did. Ironically, this first woman awardee, Dr. Susan Hawson, subsequently left academia to retrain as a medic. And I think this tells actually quite an interesting and unfortunately recurrent story. If we zoom a little bit to the most recent winners of this, so this is the same graph, but by year since 2000. And you can see that actually, so this, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is me. Oops, sorry, this is me here. Sorry. You can see that very often when a woman was awarded the prize, actually, they were sharing the prize with someone else. And most of the time, this someone else was a prize. So actually, in the whole history of the prize, there's only been one sole woman awardee, and that was that first awardee. I also looked since 2000 at the titles you can find online of the women awardees, and none of the 7 women awardees were professors, although more than half of the men were. I Googled the recipients and found that of all of those since 2000, there were, I think, no Black or Asian recipients, as far as I can tell from their pictures. And also very little diversity in terms of the institutions where these individuals were, despite the number of universities in the UK. This is a UK award. So 3 institutions included more than half of the winners. So when I looked at the list, this is a prize you have to apply for, the list of recipients before me, I found that this looks like basically it was a prize for white men who were either from Imperial College, Oxford, or Cambridge, really. And when I looked at specific awardees, Hans mentioned some of them, but if I think about the people I admired amongst the winners, here are some of the names. Paul Fountainhead, who's work in statistics, I greatly admire and use in my own research. Brian Ripley, who you might know because most of you probably use R on a daily basis, as me. Stephen Hawking, of course, is the person who, when I talk to people outside the field about this prize and they're like, oh, what is this prize? I'm like, the best thing I can say is Stephen Hawking won it. And despite it, making me very proud, it's also quite awkward to have to go to a white man figure to explain the award I won. And you might know Harold Jeffreys as well for Jeffreys Prize. So this is kind of like the picture I, set for myself when I decided to apply to this. I have to say this has had quite an impact on my career so far. Of course, it's an award I can put on my CV, but it has brought me, I think, recognition in the field, including from collaborators and colleagues. I have a collaborator, colleague, white man, who did tell me that, it was very sad he didn't have time to apply because otherwise he would probably have had it. So I thought but joke apart, this has triggered multiple invitations as a speaker, and I believe today is one of those. And of course, I can add all of those to my CV. I've had journal editors call me to say, oh, congratulations, could we have a chat? Would you like to publish your research in our journals? So it's really kind of given me a boost in confidence and brought me into an overall positive career cycle and confidence cycle, which I wonder whether this is what being a white man feels like. But I almost did not apply to this prize. I felt like I would never get it. And I think this feeling was really triggered by the lack of diversity in previous winners. I have been very lucky to be surrounded by amazing colleagues and mentors, and a few of them, 3 of them in particular are in the room, they'll recognize themselves. Some of them pushed me to apply for this, predominantly women, actually. And I really want to thank them because if I had not applied, I obviously wouldn't have had this prize, and it would have reinforced my imposter syndrome and put me into a negative loop. And so following winning this prize, I was then invited to give a talk at Epidemic's conference last year. And I looked similarly at the diversity among plenary speakers at Epidemic's conference and conferences before me. And I found that there was an improvement over time, but until last year, there had been more people named Mark or Mark with the 2 spellings than ethnic minority women, for example, speaking at plenaries at Epidemics. And there had been more people named Mark, John, or Brian than non-native speaking women like me. And hence this again made me feel like a bit of an imposter standing there giving that plenary. And so I decided to embrace that kind of feeling of imposter and to draw a landscape of what is the state of diversity in our field of infectious disease dynamics. And I talked about this at that plenary at Epidemics. I've since written this as a paper in Epidemics in case you're interested. And so apologies to those of you who were already at Epidemics, but I'm going to repeat a lot of the same things. So I kind of felt like it was particularly important to discuss this topic because I think we're really at a turning point where epidemic modeling is both more popular because of being recognized as having played a key role during the pandemic and maybe attracting more talents than in the past, although I'm not sure this has continued over the years, but definitely in 2020, 2021, we were, I think, attracting a lot of people to the field. However, the pay, if you're doing epidemic modeling in academia, is really bad, at least in the UK. Here you can see a graph showing kind of like the increase in prices with inflation over the last few years and how public sector pay has definitely not followed this. I'm quite hopeful with the change in government that this would change, but probably not to the point that this becomes a career you choose for money. In addition, I think we as a community and some of us definitely as individuals are still traumatized by the pandemic. And here you can see a word cloud that is made of words that were used by infectious disease modelers based in the UK in a workshop where they reflected on the experience of doing real-time modeling for the pandemic. And you can see a few kind of green positive words, but also a lot of negative words being used. Perhaps more strikingly, Nature conducted a survey of scientists who had commented about COVID-19 in the news to the public, and 15% of the respondents said that they had received death threats. So given this, I'm not sure our field is really so attractive. And this made me wonder what our community would look like in 10 years. And my hypothesis was that it would be a bunch of highly privileged individuals, because less privileged individuals would be more likely to quit, and individuals and a community with little diversity unless we actively worked to promote it. And why does it matter? Because I think because of the weight of privilege, we're missing out on some talent and on diversity, and diverse working groups have been demonstrated to be more productive, creative, and innovative. So what is privilege? This was a concept defined by feminist and activist Peggy McIntosh in an essay in 1988, where she defines privilege as an unearned advantage or an arbitrarily awarded power. And she reflects on her own experiences of white privilege, which she benefits from as a white person, and male privilege, which she suffers from as a woman. And she says that white privilege is an invisible weightless knapsack of special provisions, assurances, tools, maps, guides, code books, passports, visas, clothes, compass, emergency gear, and blank checks. So all the things you might take for granted if you are in the privileged category, but which really hamper your ability to do things if you're not in that category. And privilege, of course, is not just being white or being a man, it's really multifaceted. And I really like this visual representation of it, where each axis on this wheel is a different privilege facet. So you have skin color, for example, here, or gender here. And the concentric circles picture different levels of privilege for that axis. So, for example, a white person would be more privileged than a dark person. And a tool that has been used to explore this multifaceted privilege landscape is the privilege walk. So it's an exercise that's designed to raise awareness of various forms of privilege, to appreciate the diversity in a room or in a community, and to explore multiple aspects of one's own privileges. Usually it's run physically in a small group where all the individuals are lined up, and then they're asked a few questions about privilege. And for each question, they either step forward if they are privileged with respect to that question, or they step backwards if they're not privileged with respect to that question. And at the end, people observe where they stand in the room from the very front with the very, very privileged individuals all the way to the back with the least privileged individuals. And they can see where they stand, but also where other members of their community stand. So I'd like us, if you agree, to try and do a simplified virtual version of the privilege walk today. A few disclaimers: I've got no training whatsoever to run this exercise, but I have run it before and people seem to find it useful. I will be asking you personal questions, so please do not participate if you don't want to, but know that answers are fully anonymous. And the data will be analyzed and displayed on screen immediately after being collected, and if the technology will be with me today. I won't be using the data for any further analysis, but if the organizers are interested, I might share the data with them in case it provides a useful insight into their community and perhaps a way to start collecting this sort of information to monitor diversity and privilege among this community. So without further ado, if you do have your phone, I'd be very grateful if you can pull it out and either scan the QR code, or if this doesn't work, please use the link at the bottom. And you'll have a series of questions. The first few questions are about privilege, and the last few are about your gender, ethnicity, and career stage to provide a bit of context. So I'll give you a few minutes to fill in this. At the end, you can click a button which says view score. Please do that and remember your score for the rest of the talk. And if people can maybe raise their hand when they're done, that I think I can see the room, so then I can decide when is a good time to start the data analysis.
I've just dropped the bit.ly link into general if you want to click at it from there.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Julia.
It's not easy to get everybody to shut up in a meeting. The speaker is talking. It's an amazing experience.
Okay, Cecile, who is the one person I can identify, seems to be done. So can people who are not done, or people who are done, raise your hand, please? Okay, so I'll still give you a couple of minutes for the others. Okay, can we try again? People who are done, raise your hand, please.
Oh, it looks much better.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. So I'm going to go, and hopefully you can still see this. So I wrote this script which reads in the data and produces a PowerPoint. So please cross your fingers for me. Okay, so this is it. Right. So how diverse are we? Oh, actually, this is great. So this is among all the people who have answered or have finished on time, we can see a very good balance between men and women. I should say, for the purpose of making sure that the real-time analysis would work, I have not pictured here people who have said other to the gender question. I'll talk a bit about non-binary or other gender individuals later in the talk, but they're not pictured here. Apologies. But yeah, very good balance between men and women, not a huge amount of ethnic diversity, perhaps. And looking at whether this varies by career stage. So on the left-hand side, you can see here the proportion of females overall, so almost 50%, and then by career stage from student to academic tenured, and there doesn't seem to be any variation here. On the right is the proportion of individuals who are not white, so which I call ethnic minorities here. So overall 20%, but actually here it seems that this is declining from student at about 50% to academic tenured at a very, very low number. So this is quite interesting, I think. Now, looking at how privileged people were in answering those questions. So this here plots your what was called your score at the end. If you can remember it, you can perhaps identify who you are. So the more at the top individuals are more privileged and the people at the bottom are less privileged. The colors are purple-ish for women and orange-ish for men. And the darker shades are for individuals from ethnic minorities, and the lighter shades for both are for white individuals. And the shape of the dots depends on the career stage, basically. So I think this tells us that overall we are quite privileged because most people are kind of above the midpoint, but with a lot of diversity. And I kind of feel like probably already I can see some differences with more women having a score below 5 compared to the number of men. But we can have a look at this immediately in this graph where I've summarized the information in box plots. So again, the y-axis, sorry, here is increased privilege from 0 to 10. So 0, not very privileged, 10, very privileged. And you can see, I think, quite clearly a trend whereby female ethnic minorities are on average less privileged than white females, and on average less privileged than men, although we can't see any difference really between the ethnic minority man and the white man. I should say at Epidemics, this works better in terms of statistical power. This room isn't huge, but I have now run this multiple times, and this is a pattern that I have seen in every room I have done this. Interestingly here, on the right-hand side is the same kind of privilege box plot, but stratified by career stage from student to academic tenured. And here I don't see a clear trend, so that's also interesting. Okay, so this was the kind of interactive part. Thank you so much for participating. And I'd like to now kind of, just use this for you to reflect today, but also, when you go home on what you learned through the exercise. Hopefully you were able to identify where you stood compared to your peers. Were you surprised by, overall the level of privilege and diversity in the community and where you stood there? How did it feel to be maybe in a more or less privileged group? And of course, please remember that we only here explored some aspects of privilege. The standard privilege walks that you can find on the internet are usually at least 20 or 30 questions, and I shortened this for the purpose of being able to run this in real time during this session. So now, now that we know kind of what the status of this community is, I wanted to talk a bit more about some aspects of privilege. And today I decided to talk about gender, sexuality, skin color, and language. And here in red, I've showed where I stand with respect to those. So I'm amongst the most privileged as a white heterosexual person, but a bit less privileged, sort of intermediate level of privilege as a cisgender woman who learned English, so I'm not a native speaker. So let's start with this, the question of language privilege in academia. You'll notice I have, without being told really, decided to do this talk in English. And indeed, English is the language that we use in academia de facto. And this interesting study from last year actually compared the amount of time it takes a native English speaker and a non-native English speaker to perform tasks that we could say are kind of everyday academic life tasks. And they found that it takes, for example, twice as much time for a non-native speaker to read a paper compared to a native speaker, twice as much time for a non-native speaker to prepare and practice a presentation like the one I'm giving now compared to a native speaker. And they also found that half of non-native English speakers often decide to not give presentations, oral presentations at conferences because of this. Beyond language, accent is also a privilege, with regional and non-native accents often affecting the perception of an audience and often associated with negative stereotypes regarding technical competence. And this affects academics at conferences, but also in meetings, in job interviews, in grant interviews, but also in the coffee room. And I've put here a photo that was taken at Epidemic's 9 conference, where they had these little machines to pretendedly translate live into multiple languages. So it's great to see this. Obviously, the whole conference was in English, and I've very rarely seen those actually used. So re-emphasizing the privilege of those who can speak English well. What about gender? Gender is the elephant in the room. In the UK, 75% of professors are men. And this is despite the fact that more than half of undergraduates are women. So we see a decline in the proportion of females from undergraduate all the way to professors. This year, a study actually found that in the UK, women take almost 15 years, 1-5, more than men to secure a full professorship. So this is like an incredible imbalance. And in the US, the picture is very similar. This plot here shows the proportion of women at different career stages since PhD, and you can see a decline. What was interesting in this study is that they looked at different disciplines, and this is what the colored lines are. And you can see that, you know, unsurprisingly, in some disciplines like mathematics and computing or engineering, you start with fewer women than, say, in medicine and health or humanities. However, the decline happens in exactly the same way across all disciplines. So women just don't make it to the more senior stages of academia. What does this mean for gender equality and equity? Very often I'm asked to contribute to panels, interview panels, or you know, being an examiner for a PhD. And often I think people are aiming to have 50% of women and 50% of men in those committees. But given that, say, at professor level in the UK, you only have 25% of women, if you aim for equality in committees, this actually incurs a very high relative burden on each woman. And I'm not going to teach this audience how to calculate this. This is just an odds ratio odds calculation, sorry. But in the case where you only have 25% of women in your community, in your denominator, for example, professors in the UK, aiming for 50% women in committees would mean that each of those women would do 3 times as much work as each man. So please keep that in mind. I wanted to look at gender diversity in the people who did the modeling in real time for the pandemic in the UK. So we had a group called SPIMO for UK Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Modeling. And so I retrieved the names of the individuals who contributed to SPIMO from the website, and I looked at their gender and ethnicity. This is me allocating them quite arbitrarily to an ethnicity and a gender. But I found through this that almost 2/3 of the members of SPIMO were white men. And when you compare this with the UK census, you see that actually ethnic minorities were maybe a little bit underrepresented compared to the UK census. But the most striking feature is that women were really underrepresented. I was also given some data from the attendees of Epidemic's 9 conference, so looking beyond the UK at people who attended that conference, which is, you know, classic in our field. And I looked at their self-declared gender. And if you look overall, it looks pretty balanced between men and women. But actually, if you stratify by job level, you see that women are much more present in the younger or earlier career groups. And if you look at professors, actually, I think 65% or more than of them were men. You can also see, coming back to individuals who are non-binary or gender diverse, that we had, which was really nice to see, some individuals identifying as such, but unfortunately all of them were in the more junior half of this group. And so this highlights the lack of role models in senior positions in our field, in academia, who are non-binary, gender diverse, or to some extent women. There are very few of them. This is kind of advertising for a talk you'll hear tomorrow from Shweta Bensal, and her group have been looking at gender in epidemic modeling publications. And they found that most publications in our field have both a male first and last author. And they found that in addition, those man-man papers are also more likely to be cited. And in fact, the papers here on the right that have both a first and last author who are women are much less likely to be cited than others. So please watch out for that talk with very exciting, although quite depressing results. We see the same story in our department. We've looked at how many papers everyone in our department publishes, and we found that on average, each man publishes more. This is true across all job levels, from research associate to professor, and it's quite a substantial increase with on average 1.8 papers for a man for each paper published by a woman. We also found that this is not explained by gender imbalance at senior level, so this is after adjusting for that. Also not explained by maternity leave, because it would require for all women to take a 5-year publishing break to explain the observed discrepancy, which we don't think is consistent with maternity leave, which some women don't even take in their career. So we're currently exploring other reasons, including potential gender bias in other areas of work, such as teaching or marking. Our colleagues from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine have looked at this question of gender in infectious disease modeling from a qualitative angle. They ran some interviews and focus groups to identify perceived career barriers that would be specific to our field. These interviews were with people based in the UK. And they identify that our community is seen as a highly competitive boys' club with expected sacrifices of non-work commitments and pressures, for example, to engage in drinking, to be provided with opportunities. They also showed that there is a perceived hierarchy in backgrounds where computing and math backgrounds would be perceived to be more associated with men and perceived to be better than backgrounds in, say, biology or ecology that would be perceived to be more associated with women and less highly valued. They also mentioned the disproportionate invisible labor of women and non-binary people and said all of these issues were exacerbated by low numbers of senior women who actually sometimes repeat toxic patterns that they experienced. What about ethnicity? Well, in terms of the diversity, the story is very similar to gender, i.e. ethnic diversity decreases at advanced career stages. If you focus on the bottom here, this is data from the UK showing that the proportion of white individuals amongst academics increases as you increase from undergraduate in orange to professor in blue. So again, decreasing diversity at higher or more advanced career stages. And the story in the US is exactly the same, but here you have to read this bottom to top for advancing career stages. And actually, in predominantly white countries such as the UK, it can be challenging to study ethnicity privilege because of small numbers in each minority ethnic group, especially if you want to stratify by other factors. So for example, in our work on publications, we showed that white individuals publish more than others, and the gap was quite large with a median 11 papers higher for white individuals. But ethnic diversity was insufficient to fully explore this result, for example, to stratify by job level. We have job levels where we simply only have white individuals in our department. What about sexuality privilege? So this is a map that shows the status of the legal status of same-sex intercourse globally, with any shade of yellow to red showing some levels of illegality. And so this kind of highlights issues faced by LGBTQ+ scientists when they work, live, or travel for work in some of those countries, with risks to their safety, to their well-being, and to their mental health. My colleague Christina Atchison actually ran a survey to explore the perceptions and experiences of LGBTQ+ scientists at Imperial College when they were working internationally for research or fieldwork. And 61% of the respondents felt uncomfortable, unsafe, or in danger when traveling, so more than half. Almost everybody considered that overseas work travel was important for career progression, but 39% had at some point chosen not to do such travel based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So I think this really highlights a mechanism by which a lack of privilege can actually be an impediment to your career progression. Now, I've touched on three aspects of privilege: language, gender, and sexuality, and ethnicity as well, so four, sorry. But actually, it's also important to talk about intersectionality, which is basically the complex effect of overlapping facets of privilege, whereby if you are, say, a woman of color, the hurdles that you face are likely to be higher than just the sum of the hurdles that you would face by being just Black or just a woman. And I think this is really an important concept and has been, some studies have shown that it has been exacerbated by COVID. So where if you are unprivileged in different ways or on different axes in the wheel here, this really magnifies the hurdles that you face. So I don't want to leave you with a completely dark picture, and I hope that we can start discussing solutions, and I want to stay optimistic. So I think it will take efforts by many of us, but also universities, journals, funders, conferences, to solve and to start solving this problem. And in an attempt to a pun, I thought we could move away from our own models, the SIR models, which read SIR, if you read like this, to the MADAM framework, which stands for Momentum, Awareness, Dissemination, Action, and Mitigation. So momentum, I think we just need to keep it. I've talked to you about multiple initiatives. On the left, the work by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine was actually funded by a Gates grant specifically to support women working in infectious disease modeling. On the right-hand side, we had at Imperial College recently an LGBTQIA+ international support group that was founded to support concretely our staff and students who are from the LGBTQIA+ community and who travel for work. But I think there's scope for much more larger and more coordinated efforts. Awareness is really important. So we need to be aware of our own privileges and those around us. Hopefully, the privilege walk was a start for this today. And I just want to say, if you were in the bottom of that privilege graph, you should be really proud of yourself, because if you've made it to this workshop, despite this lack of privilege, you must have made up for it by an extreme amount of talent and effort. And if you were at the top, maybe it was a good thing for you to realize that, and you can use those privileges to help those around you. So be aware of the hurdles that less privileged individuals face, and be aware of your own biases. Dissemination is really critical, I think, to increase awareness, especially amongst those privileged individuals who might not even realize they are so privileged in their day-to-day life and academic life. And they're often the people who are in powerful positions and who therefore can drive change. So please read and write about this, speak about this, and this is a little advertising for a call for papers we have at the moment in Epidemics for a special series about research culture in infectious disease epidemiology. So if you would like to write something, please maybe talk to Cecile, who's in the room, or Shweta is also in the room, who's one of the co-editors. Actions are needed, of course, guided by awareness. And I think the aim of our actions should be to break this cycle whereby we have a minority, for example, women, because they're a minority and we aim for equality instead of equity, they end up doing a lot of invisible work and get overburdened by this. So think those 50% women in committees when you only have 25% of professors, for example. And because this work is invisible, they then lack the visibility and recognition, and hence they remain a minority. So how do we break that cycle? We need to empower minorities. So please support the less privileged ones around you using your own privileges. I cannot emphasize again how encouraging formal and informal mentorship, and this needs to include peer mentorship, reverse mentorship, all sorts of mentorship is really important. I've discussed early on how important it has been for my own career. And my own message now would be also for people, even if you are from a minority and an underprivileged background, please apply for everything, even if you think you do not stand a chance. To break the overburden of invisible work, we need to design and adopt a work allocation model that recognizes varied professional contributions beyond publications and in a transparent manner. So it needs to state exactly what it is each contribution worth. We also need to collect quantitative data so that we can monitor equity and progress in equity over time. And this needs to include exit surveys so we understand when people leave our field, why they do so. And finally, we need to actively showcase and perhaps exaggerate diversity. So in conferences and committees, we need to aim for diversity first, even if this means inviting individuals who are less senior. Diversity must be a primary objective. We need to refuse to speak on all white or all men panels. And we need to recognize conferences and committees in work allocation model. Otherwise, we'll always rely on the same individuals from those minorities to, contribute without recognizing that this in itself is work. If you do use pictures of your team in PowerPoint presentations, please avoid re-emphasizing the old white man club paradigm. So if you have an all white man team, please don't put photos. And finally, the final M is for mitigation of biases and privileges. So we need to mitigate unconscious and conscious bias, and there's excellent training around to do this. But if you are kind of scanning through CVs for job applications, please look for evidence of effort and talent and not just evidence of opportunities and privilege. So if someone has gone, PhD student has attended 6 conferences, this might reflect more on the privilege they have in their host university than really their talent. And this is just something we do in our everyday life, correcting for biases in epidemiological studies, so we can do the same surely for biases. And we need to mitigate the lack of privilege using training, for example, language support where needed, and by lifting both concrete barriers and self-imposed ones. So concrete barriers might be, as I've discussed, supporting LGBTQ+ who are traveling to or working in certain countries. And for self-imposed barriers, I'm thinking, for example, we know that women are less likely to put themselves forward for promotion. So we could make application to promotion mandatory or automatic to lift that barrier to women progressing in their career. So in conclusion, privilege underpins career trajectories in addition to and beyond talent and effort. All data points to it, and it's not just in other fields, it's here too. And I think it's been exacerbated by COVID. So we can't just ignore it, we need to discuss about it and action it. It's hard, we can't solve it all at once, but I think that's true of scientific research too, that it's hard and we can't solve everything at once. And we tackle that, so we should tackle this too. Finally, I've attempted to give an overview of the issue, but it's been very much through my own experience, which is largely UK and US focused. This also reflects where I have found available data. And I've not covered certain aspects, some of which, for example, caring responsibilities, you can read about in my article in Epidemics. So I hope this is just the start of the discussion. And my final thoughts is I really like this graph, although I realized afterwards it is from a classic first man author, last man author paper, but I really like this paper and this graph. So this is my version of factors that make an infectious disease epidemiologist successful, with increasing epidemiological talent and effort in x-axis and increasing privilege in y-axis. And my key take-home message would be that we see a lot of the people in the green zone who are successful people who I think can help nurture less privileged talent in the red zone, which are people I'd like to see more of. Thank you so much to everybody I've discussed these issues about in the last year or so. These are image credits, and I'll leave you, since I'm in Paris for the Olympic Games, with this graph showing the number of athletes by gender. I'll let you guess the coloring over the years. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this excellent talk. So I'll turn my back to you and see if we have questions from the room. Yes.
What are your views on positive discrimination?
I think it's needed. If I'm honest, I think it is needed. I think you know, we need to discuss it. I think for me, I have probably benefited from positive discrimination being a woman, and you know, I'm grateful for it. I think you know, if you discriminate positively for some minorities, this won't have any bad effects anyway, because if the people are not good, not talented, they don't provide efforts, this will backfire. So I think it's a good way to push them forward where they need. So I would be quite supportive of it. And I know it's quite, it's not a view that's shared by everybody, but I personally think it's a good idea.
As an example for that, maybe I should say that we had a thing like that in the Netherlands, where a technical university imposed the rule that every vacancy would only be open for women for the first 6 months, and if they couldn't find anybody then they would open it for men. There was public outrage throughout the country. This is impossible. This is going much too far. And now 5 years later, everybody is very happy about how this worked out. I mean, it worked out brilliantly. So it's possible. Okay, anyway. Other questions? Yes, Emma.
Yeah, just a comment, thanks. With the maternity leave consideration, you're saying 5 years couldn't possibly cover it. As someone, just my own personal experience, I probably only took 1 year, or half a year for each child of maternity leave, but I definitely took 5 years of decisions that I made that prioritised my children over my career. I think I probably set my career back by 5 years. So that's not something that I'm not here to blame the process, but maybe it's something we need to think about, that women maybe need additional support during that time. I'm not blaming the fact I made those choices myself and willingly and so forth. But yeah, I don't blame the system for that. I think it's just a fact and a reality.
Yeah, so just to comment on this, I think this is a very valid point that, you know, I have myself taken 2 9 months maternity leave, and they have definitely, you know, impacted my publication record. But among the data we were analyzing, there were very many women who did not have children at all. So 5 years is like the average you should have achieved between all of the women, irrespective of whether they had children or not. And then the flip side of this is that some men in our department also take leave. In the UK, it's possible to take shared parental leave. And so men are actually entitled also to take some leave. And so, yeah, I think I agree with you. I think we need to support parents and carers better. Again, this is something I left out of this talk to leave time for discussion. And I think parental leave is one of the things that, and returning to this is very important, particularly thinking about teaching duties and other duties that might be a bit lighter after you come back from parental leave to push you back into the research. It's an interesting point and important, I think, but I don't think is the only reason. I've heard so many times people say, oh, it's just because of maternity leave. I don't think that's the case.
Thank you. Other questions, remarks?
One more, sorry.
Yeah, you can have one more.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm just interested in the audience in general, what people think of anonymising publications. I know this is controversial. Some journals will do it. The reviewers are always anonymous, but the authors are generally not anonymous. So wouldn't that help in some of this problem? And with grants, obviously, as well. Not providing your name.
So if I start, I think I don't know to what extent it is possible to entirely anonymize things because I think people will tend to build up on work they've already done. And so I think even if you anonymize you don't show the authors' names, you might still be able to figure out at least which group people are from, but even maybe who the author is. And I think particularly in a grant, that might be pretty obvious. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting perspective that there have been, I think for interviews, for job interviews, there are other fields like musicians where experiments of like having completely anonymized auditions where people are behind a screen actually have helped minorities. So I think it's an interesting route to think about at least. But yeah, I'd be very happy to hear from the audience as well.
Yeah, so for example, at Proceedings B, we had a lot of discussion about do we want to move to a double anonymous, so everything is anonymous. And also these same arguments came from some of the editors that yes, but you can always find out who the author were. Yes, that's true, but you have to put in some special effort, and it's this first bias that you take away. So we switched. I'm not sure whether we don't have any results yet, I think, about how if this is working out, but we switched to being anonymous, so people have to take off their names and all sorts of other things, but not in the reference list, because that is that's the biggest issue. Because if you also anonymize the reference list, then you need to be able to see whether they have the right references, right? So I mean, otherwise you go. I mean, it's impossible.
But it's the early unconscious bias that's the big pillar. It's like seeing the female name.
Exactly.
And if you're in a position where you go, I wonder who wrote this. I wonder if they're a man or a woman. You're a problem. You're a problem anyway.
Exactly. You're part of the problem.
We have to sort of acknowledge most people aren't deliberately part of the problem.
Exactly.
You know, it's unconscious.
Just to that point as well, if we're also going for open source code, and like a part of a review now is looking over the code that someone's published, which is always attached to their name on GitHub. So maybe there needs to be some kind of facility within a journal as well where the code can be in a separate repo that's in some way anonymized if we're going to go down
good point.
because it's medium.
Yeah. Good point.
And I think, a last point on this, I think Shweta will mention this tomorrow, but I think there's also a role for more varied editorial boards. So I think it's been demonstrated that when more women participate in editorial boards, this also helps a fairer review and citation process.
True. Julia.
I'm putting my hand up on behalf of Magda, who's online, so I'm going to read out her question from Zoom, if that's okay.
Yep.
And you can probably see it already, but for the room. Any information or figures on what percentage of academic professionals take shared parental leave or paternity leave?
So I can talk through about our information from Imperial College that I have looked into. So the first thing is that it's very hard because a woman has to declare that they're going, a childbearing woman, has to declare that they're going to be on maternity leave in order to be able to be paid. So we have very good denominators for who is eligible for maternity leave. We don't have such good denominators for people who are fathers or non-birth mothers or second parents because people don't have to tell us if they're having a baby, basically. So it's very hard to analyze this. But I think this goes into the question of intersectionality, which is that often the childbearing woman will be often the least well paid of the two, and so taking shared parental leave will also come with financial consequences of salary loss, and the non-childbearing person will often be the one who earns more. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about how to better collect this data. I know of some people, some fathers, for example, who have taken shared parental leave in our department, but I don't know how many have not when they could have, basically. So it's a very biased sample. I don't know if others have more experience from other universities. I'd be grateful to hear them. But
Okay, thanks. There was a question at the front here.
It's fine.
No, it's fine?
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes?
So thanks for the nice talk. You showed us snapshot data of distributions of things, but careers are of course age structured, and so I wonder if there's any data that tells us how rapidly we're approaching steady state, or whether we're approaching steady state, or anything related to the rate of change.
Yeah, this is a good question. So I haven't put this in. I can tell you. So I've had questions before about, oh, is this just because this is just inherited issues from the time when current professors were students, and at the time the gender imbalance, for example, was very bad. But there are multiple studies. I'm sorry I didn't put any references there, that have used kind of formal survival analysis to look at this, and unfortunately they show that there is a remaining gap, at least between men and women, and that the hazard of leaving academia is still much higher in women than in men. I don't know whether it has changed at all, to be fair, but it's definitely still significantly different and higher in women than in men.
I was aware of that. I was just wondering if there's any rate of change estimates.
Yeah. Not that I know of, but I think this would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll get a bit better. But yeah.
Just on that, Melbourne Uni did a study of that, and they predicted that it would be 90 years until it reached equilibrium. So it was changing.
With action or without action?
With the current action, which had some evidence of slow improvement on gender, but it was generations before it would be useful.
When you say equilibrium, that's 130 years.
I can't remember. Possibly steady state or possibly equality. Sorry, I can't remember.
Justin?
Yeah, so do you have any thoughts about how we might be dynamic in how we think about diversity? And what I mean is, like, sometimes it seems like there's a substitution of, for instance, getting, addressing gender and racial diversity, but then having less potentially like academic institution and urban-rural diversity. Like the world changes and the centers of power in the change. So what types of diversity we're losing out on may change over time. Do you have thoughts on how we can stay dynamic in how we think about it?
This is an excellent question. I mean, I don't know, but I think even if it's not dynamic, gender has not been very dynamic, in most countries anyway. Half of births are women, and I think we're not doing very well there. So I think this is almost like, something else we need to think about monitoring. But I think we could already think about where we're at now and how how much improvement and space for improvement there is at the moment. But I agree with you. I think it's a difficult question. I think it's a question that varies definitely depending on the context. I mean, in London, the population is very different to other places. And so the diversity we need to represent is very different. Although, of course, people move in an academic career. And so, a lot of the people who work with me in London are not actually from London. So, yeah, I don't have a good answer to this. I think it's an interesting question, but I think there's, even without considering that, there is still a lot of progress to be made. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Justin, or anyone else.
Okay, it's time. So I'll address you again. Thank you very much, Anne, for confronting us with all this and keeping us confronted with all this, which is very good, I think, that you do this. So I hope you carry on. And also I should say congratulations on the Adams Prize, because I forgot to say that. And to everybody else, of course, we all apply for the Adams Prize next year. Anne's advice. So
you have to be less than 40, Hans, I'm sorry.
However, one of the stats you showed in the beginning about that they only came from 2 universities, I think part of that is explainable, because I think until 1960s or so, it was only for people who actually studied in Cambridge. So it's a bit biased that way. But anyway. So thank you very much for talking to us during your holiday from Paris. Enjoy the Olympic Games. And
thank you so much.
Again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.